What if I told you that Hollywood's golden age, the era we remember for its dazzling stars and timeless films, was also haunted by a hidden epidemic? Behind the glittering lights and carefully crafted images, many golden age stars wrestled with addictions that the studios preferred to keep in the shadows. These struggles weren't just private tragedies. They revealed a dangerous system where fame often demanded self-destruction. In this countdown of the top 10 Golden Age street Rs with the worst Hollywood addictions, we're not here to sensationalize suffering. Instead, we'll explore what these stories teach us about pressure, mental health, and the way industries can exploit their brightest talents. Some tales will shock you, others will break your heart, but every single one carries a lesson still relevant today. By the end, you'll never look at Golden Age Hollywood the same way again, and if you find value in stories that reveal the truth behind the glamour, consider subscribing. It really helps us keep uncovering Hollywood's hidden history. Let's dive in. W.C. Fields was one of Hollywood's great comic eccentrics, instantly recognizable by his gravelly voice, sly grin, and endless supply of cutting one-liners. To audiences, he was the lovable curmudgeon who claimed to despise children and preferred a stiff drink in hand. The gag was funny, but for Fields, the line between joke and reality grew thinner with every passing year. What began as a stage prop became a constant companion. Directors indulged the image. Fans expected it. Soon, the character who always reached for the bottle off-screen had little choice but to do the same when the cameras stopped rolling. By the 1,932nd the strain showed. His timing remained sharp, but his health began to crack. Rumors spread of unpredictable moods on set, long delays, and producers quietly wondering if the risk was worth the reward. Fields tried to maintain control, but the persona had swallowed the man. The sharp-tongued comedian who once turned his vices into punchlines found those same habits tightening their grip. His body paid the price: liver, ailments, fatigue, and the weary look of someone fighting a battle most of his audience never saw. And yet his films endure. Watch them now, and the humor still lands, but there's an undercurrent that feels different once you know the story. The laughter came at a cost, and the comic drunk that audiences adored was not simply an act. It was the man himself hiding in plain sight. Fields left behind a legacy of wit and invention, but also a reminder that sometimes the funniest masks conceal the heaviest truths. And if that revelation unsettles, you just wait until we reach number 9, where Hollywood's most handsome leading man discovered that brilliance could crumble even faster. For a time, John Barrymore seemed untouchable. Nicknamed the Great Profile, he was the embodiment of theatrical brilliance, moving seamlessly from Shakespeare's stage to Hollywood's silver screen. His presence was magnetic, his voice commanding, his reputation unrivaled. To fans, he was more than an actor. He was artistry made flesh. But away from the spotlight, Barrymore's reliance on alcohol began to seep into his work. Crews adjusted schedules to film his crucial scenes early, fearing he might not make it through the day. At first, people dismissed it as colorful excess, the kind of eccentricity expected from geniuses. But the indulgence deepened, and whispers became headlines. Memory lapses, slurred performances, and canceled contracts slowly chipped away at the grandeur. By the 1,942nd, the contrast was striking. The man once hailed as a giant of stage and film sometimes struggled to recall his own lines. Colleagues who had once envied his natural gifts now watched with unease, uncertain if he could carry a production to completion. The charisma was still there, flickering, but overshadowed by the toll of years spent fighting an unseen battle. Barrymore's story lingers because it embodies the fragility of fame. He had talent that could move audiences to awe, yet even that brilliance could not shield him from decline. His films remain preserving flashes of his genius, but they carry with them a quiet echo of what might have been. The fall of the Great Profile was not sudden, but a slow erosion played out under the gaze of millions. And if you think his collapse was difficult to watch, the next story takes us to Hollywood's most daring swashbuckler, whose descent was every bit as dramatic as the roles that made him famous. Errol Flynn was the face of adventure in the 1,932nd and 42nd, the man who leapt across ships with a sword in hand, stole hearts with a grin, and embodied Hollywood's idea of the perfect rogue. To millions, he was Robin Hood, come to life, a star who seemed destined never to fade. But while audiences cheered his daring stunts, Flynn's real battles were fought off-screen far from Sherwood Forest. The actor's charisma came with a restless edge. Nights blurred into mornings, and the drink became as constant a companion as the costumes he wore on set. At first, his charm made it easy to dismiss producers, shrugged fans, laughed, and the image of the reckless playboy only boosted his allure. Yet, with each passing year, the toll grew harder to ignore. His performances, once electric, began to show strain, and behind the bravado was a man whose health was slipping away. Stories circulated of erratic behavior and unpredictable moods. Colleagues described brilliance interrupted by long stretches of absence, as if the heroic figure on screen could no longer keep up with the man behind him. By the 1952nd, Flynn looked older than his years. The shine of his star dimmed not by lack of talent, but by choices that chipped away at his body and reputation alike. Even in decline, his legend endured. Fans still clung to the swashbuckler they had grown up admiring, while insiders whispered of a life that had spun far too fast. Watching Flynn is to witness both sides at once, the daring hero etched forever in celluloid, and the man whose off-screen spiral left him a shadow of that figure. And if Flynn's downfall seems steep, just wait until number 7, where a horror icon traded his cape for something even more chilling. When audiences first saw Bela Lugosi step onto the screen as Dracula in 1931, a chill ran through theaters across America. Cloaked in black eyes, piercing his accent, rolling every syllable into something hypnotic, Lugosi became the definitive vampire. For decades afterward, no other actor could separate himself from his shadow. But while the cape brought him immortality on screen, it could not protect him from the growing darkness in his personal life. By the mid-1932nd, Lugosi was struggling with severe sciatic pain, the kind that made even standing difficult. Doctors prescribed morphine, a common treatment at the time, and what began as relief quickly became reliance. Hollywood was not a forgiving place for actors who faltered, and soon rumors circulated that the man who played the undead Count was himself battling a very human weakness. Unlike many of his peers, Lugosi did not keep his dependence hidden forever. In 1955, years after his peak fame, he made a startling choice for that era. He checked himself into a state hospital in California, openly admitting his morphine addiction. For an actor associated with mystery and menace, it was a moment of striking vulnerability. The press covered it widely, some cruelly, others with sympathy, and Lugosi became one of the first major Hollywood figures to publicly seek treatment for substance dependency. The admission cost him. Roles were already scarce. His typecasting as Dracula had trapped him in low-budget horror films, and now studios hesitated further. Yet there was courage in his decision. At a time when society rarely acknowledged addiction as anything but shame, Lugosi broke the silence. Friends, including fellow horror actor Boris Karloff, expressed support, and audiences who had once feared him now glimpsed the frailty behind the legend. Still, the years were not kind. Financial difficulties mounted, and Lugosi found himself working in increasingly modest productions, sometimes parodies of the roles that had made him famous. His health never fully recovered, though he managed brief stretches of stability after treatment. When he died in 1956, the irony was undeniable. He was laid to rest in his Dracula cape, forever bound to the character that had made him a star and overshadowed the rest of his career. To watch Lugosi's performances today is to see both brilliance and tragedy interwoven. The power in his eyes, the elegance of his movement, they remain captivating. But with hindsight, one also sees a man caught between Hollywood's demands and his own frailties. His decision to step forward and confront his addiction publicly remains one of the more human moments of the Golden Age, a reminder that beneath the roles and costumes were men and women navigating pain, pressure, and choices in a world that demanded perfection. Lugosi's story is chilling not because he played Dracula, but because behind that immortal mask was a man searching for relief and finally for honesty. And if you thought the horror ended there, number 6 reveals an actor whose whispering voice carried secrets every bit as haunting. If Bela Lugosi gave us the vampire's chilling stare, Peter Lorre gave us the haunted whisper. With his wide, sorrowful eyes and unsettlingly soft voice, Lorre became Hollywood's go-to figure for villains who frightened not through brute strength, but through eerie unease. From M in 1931, where he portrayed a child killer with unnerving precision, to Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon, his presence lingered long after the credits rolled. Yet off-screen, Lorre's life was marked by a different kind of struggle, one less theatrical but no less destructive. During the height of his career, Lorre developed chronic health issues, including severe gallbladder problems that left him in constant pain. Doctors, as was common in the mid-20th century, prescribed morphine and other painkillers liberally. For Lorre, the relief was immediate, but so too was the dependency. What started as medical necessity slid into daily reliance, and soon the man who could mesmerize audiences with a single line was wrestling with a dependence that gnawed at his health and career. Unlike the flamboyant spirals of other stars, Lorre's decline was quiet, almost hidden. He remained professional on set, often arriving prepared and delivering the exact performance directors wanted. But those who worked closely with him noticed the toll. His once slim frame bloated, his energy flagged, and the sparkle in his eyes dimmed. Scripts that might have once seemed effortless became labors, and roles gradually shifted from complex characters to secondary appearances. Hollywood's studio system rarely offered compassion. To executives, stars were investments, and if one faltered, another could be slotted in. Laura's name still drew interest, but his opportunities dwindled. Friends like Humphrey Bogart remained supportive, yet even loyalty had limits in an industry built on relentless momentum. There were moments of resilience. Laurie sought treatment multiple times, attempting to step away from dependency. But like many of his generation, he faced a cycle of brief recoveries followed by relapse. Without modern understandings of addiction or the resources actors might find today, the struggle remained his alone. Each comeback was met with applause, but each stumble was whispered about in backlots and casting offices. By the 1962nd, the transformation was stark. The once intense face had grown puffy, his performances slowed, and his health steadily declined. Yet audiences who loved him never forgot the impression he left. His peculiar cadence, his ability to make menace seem both tragic and human was unique. Even in diminished form, Laurie commanded attention, proof of how powerful his talent truly was. When he died in 1964 at just 59, Hollywood lost more than a character actor. It lost a man whose career mirrored the era's blind faith in quick fixes, where doctors' prescriptions offered temporary comfort but no lasting solution. Watching Laurie today, it's hard not to sense the weight he carried behind those heavy-lidded eyes. His legacy is both chilling and tender, a reminder of the cost that sometimes came with giving everything to the screen. And if his story leaves you unsettled, number 5 reveals a legend who turned her private battles into a very public stand. If Peter Lorre was remembered for his whisper, Elizabeth Taylor was remembered for her eyes, violet, dazzling, and impossible to forget. She entered Hollywood as a child star in National Velvet and grew into one of the most iconic actresses of the 20th century. Her career spanned decades, and her beauty became shorthand for the Golden Age itself. But beyond the diamonds, the headlines, and the Academy Awards, Taylor carried a burden that eventually forced her to step into the spotlight for an entirely different reason. Taylor's life was lived under constant pressure. Married 8 times, hounded by paparazzi, and pushed by studios to maintain a perfect image, she endured a whirlwind existence that would have tested anyone. Along the way came accidents, chronic back pain, and the steady prescription of pills to keep her working. Alcohol soon joined the mix. For years, she functioned in spite of it, delivering acclaimed performances in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and other classics, even as those close to her noticed the toll. By the early 1982nd, however, the facade cracked. Taylor collapsed during rehearsals and was hospitalized. In December 1983, she made a choice. Few Hollywood legends of her stature had dared before she checked herself into the Betty Ford Center for treatment. The announcement shocked the press. Here was one of the most glamorous women alive, admitting publicly that she needed help. For an industry built on illusions of perfection, Taylor's honesty was groundbreaking. The stay was grueling. She described withdrawal as agonizing, and the process of confronting her dependency as more terrifying than any film role. Yet when she emerged, she did so with a candor that changed the conversation. Instead of hiding her struggles, she spoke openly about them, acknowledging the pressures that had pushed her into dependency and the courage it took to seek recovery. Taylor's decision resonated far beyond Hollywood. Fans saw vulnerability where they had only seen glamour. For others trapped in silence, her admission provided a mirror. They were not alone, and if Elizabeth Taylor could seek help, perhaps they could too. The media, which once reveled in her scandals, now chronicled her resilience. She had transformed from tabloid fixture into pioneer. In later years, Taylor's health continued to falter, but she remained steadfast in her advocacy. She used her platform not only to discuss addiction, but also to champion causes like HIV, AIDS, awareness, becoming one of the first major celebrities to speak out during the height of the crisis. Her legacy, therefore, is not just cinematic, it is deeply human. Elizabeth Taylor's story stands apart from the tragic spirals of her contemporaries because it offered something rare, a glimpse of redemption. She did not erase her struggles, but she refused to be defined by them. The woman once known solely for her beauty became a symbol of candor and strength. And if Taylor's revelation feels courageous, number 4 will remind us how even the brightest stars can be consumed by silence, leaving behind only unanswered questions. If Elizabeth Taylor embodied Hollywood's enduring glamour, Marilyn Monroe embodied its fragile dream. With her platinum hair, breathy voice, and radiant smile, Monroe became the ultimate symbol of desire in the 1952nd. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot cemented her as an icon whose appeal seemed effortless. Yet behind the sparkle of stardom, Monroe's life was a storm of sleepless nights, relentless pressure, and pills that promised rest but delivered only dependence. From her earliest days in the studio system, Monroe struggled with anxiety and insecurity. The image of the carefree bombshell was carefully sculpted by executives who saw her marketability, not her vulnerability. To keep the machine running, she relied on barbiturates and sleeping pills, medications prescribed liberally at the time, often without caution about their risks. Nights that should have brought rest instead became battles, and bottles of pills lined her bedside. Colleagues noticed. Directors reported delays as she arrived late to set, groggy from medication. Co-stars like Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon admired her charisma, but quietly acknowledged her unpredictability. Every performance seemed like a miracle pulled from chaos, the laughter on screen hiding the turmoil that followed once the cameras stopped. Monroe sought help repeatedly: therapy sessions, hospital stays, brief periods of stability, but the cycle tightened. The more she struggled, the more the tabloids feasted, turning her pain into headlines. The marriage to Joe DiMaggio collapsed under scrutiny, her union with Arthur Miller faltered, and the loneliness deepened. Fame, instead of providing security, became a cage from which she could not escape. On the night of the 4th of August 1962, Monroe was found in her Los Angeles home, a victim of acute barbiturate poisoning. The official report listed probable suicide, though speculation has endured for decades. What is undeniable is the sense of loss. She was only 36, her career still vibrant, her influence still growing. Hollywood had created an image too large for one person to carry, and in the end, the burden proved crushing. Looking back, Monroe's story resonates not only because of her beauty and talent, but because of her humanity. She was adored by millions, yet felt profoundly alone. She made the world laugh, yet fought private despair. Her reliance on pills was not just a personal failing, it was a reflection of an industry that prized appearances over well-being, speed over care, and profit over people. Today, Monroe's face remains one of the most recognized in the world, printed on posters, painted on murals, immortalized in pop art. But her legacy is more complex than the smile frozen in photographs. It is the story of a woman who gave everything to her craft only to be undone by the very system that celebrated her. And if Monroe's tragic silence still echoes, number 3 reveals another star whose fall was not sudden but stretched across years, a slow unraveling that turned brilliance into heartbreak. If Marilyn Monroe was the face of Hollywood's fragility, Montgomery Clift was its soul. With his brooding eyes and delicate intensity, Clift redefined acting in the 1942nd and 52nd. Alongside contemporaries like Marlon Brando and James Dean, he embodied a new style, raw, vulnerable, almost painfully real. Audiences didn't just watch Clift, they felt him. Yet beneath that magnetic talent lay a man haunted by insecurities, and one night in 1956 would alter his trajectory forever. After leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift's car skidded off a winding road and crashed. Friends who rushed to the scene found him bloodied, his face shattered. Taylor herself famously pulled broken teeth from his throat to keep him from choking. The accident left Clift disfigured, though surgeons worked tirelessly to reconstruct his features. When he returned to the screen, the difference was subtle to some, glaring to others. For Clift, it was devastating. The physical pain was constant, and with it came prescriptions for strong painkillers. What began as necessary relief soon became daily reliance, compounded by alcohol as he searched for comfort in the haze. The once bright, disciplined actor found himself caught in a cycle: work, medicate, drink, repeat. Colleagues whispered about his trembling hands on set, his slurred lines, his difficulty remembering dialogue. Directors who had once hailed him as the future of cinema now hesitated, uncertain if he could carry a film. And yet flashes of brilliance remained. In Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, Clift delivered a performance so raw that critics praised it as one of his finest. But the effort cost him. Every scene was a battle every day, a test of endurance. The industry watched as one of its brightest angels slowly descended undone, not by scandal or arrogance, but by pain and dependency. By the mid-1962nd, the transformation was heartbreaking. Once considered Hollywood's most beautiful man, Clift looked far older than his years. Friends described him as gentle but unreachable, drifting in and out of lucidity. On the 23rd of July 1966, he was found dead in his Manhattan townhouse at just 45, officially from a heart attack. Many who knew him believed it was the inevitable conclusion of a life eroded by the combined weight of injury, addiction, and despair. Clift's story endures because it captures a paradox: extraordinary talent and extraordinary suffering coexisting in the same body. Watching his early films is to glimpse the promise of an actor who could have redefined generations. Watching his later ones is to see courage in the face of decline. He remains in many ways the most human of stars, a man who gave everything to his craft, even as it consumed him. And if Clift's unraveling feels unbearably intimate, number 2 reveals a legend whose private demons stood in stark contrast to the saintly image Hollywood carefully constructed. If Montgomery Clift symbolized fragility, Spencer Tracy embodied strength. To audiences, Tracy was Hollywood's moral compass, the everyman hero, steady and dependable, a figure whose presence radiated integrity. Whether playing a tough judge, a compassionate priest, or a determined working-class father, he gave the impression of a man unshakable in both values and spirit. Yet beneath the surface of that saintly image lived a secret that haunted him for decades, a lifelong battle with alcohol. Unlike stars whose excesses spilled into the tabloids, Tracy's demons were carefully contained. Studios shielded him, directors covered for him, and colleagues who adored his talent learned to navigate his unpredictable moods. On screen, he was flawless. Off-screen, he could disappear for days, retreating into bouts of drinking that left him physically broken and emotionally drained. His resilience on film belied a private torment that those closest to him, like his longtime companion Katharine Hepburn, witnessed with quiet concern. Tracy's struggle began long before his fame. As a young man, he turned to drink during restless spells, and the habit deepened as his career soared. Success did not cure the unease within him. It magnified it. Friends described him as deeply self-critical, a perfectionist who doubted his own worth even while collecting Oscars. Alcohol became both escape and punishment, a cycle that gnawed at his health and spirit. Yet the cameras never caught him faltering. Directors worked around his absences, rearranging schedules to protect their star. His professionalism when sober was unmatched. He could deliver entire scenes in a single take, commanding both cast and crew with quiet authority. That reliability on set contrasted sharply with the chaos outside, creating a double life that only insiders understood. By the 1962nd, the toll was visible. Tracy's once vigorous frame had weakened, his health eroded by years of drinking. And yet his performances deepened as though the weight he carried lent him gravity on screen. In Guess Who's Coming to Dinner 1967, his final film, he delivered lines with such poignancy that audiences felt the truth behind them, though few realized just how close he was to the end. Days after finishing the film, he was gone dead of a heart attack at 67. What makes Tracy's story unsettling is the contrast. To the world, he was incorruptible, a symbol of decency. Privately, he waged a war he rarely won. His legacy remains luminous, yet shadowed by the knowledge that the man who embodied Hollywood's conscience could not escape his own torment. And if Tracy's hidden struggle feels like the cruelest irony, number 1 strips away all pretense, showing us how the very machinery of Hollywood itself drove one of its brightest lights to an end, as tragic as it was inevitable. If Spencer Tracy embodied Hollywood's conscience, Judy Garland embodied its cost. She was just 16 when she followed the yellow brick road as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, 1939, her voice carrying over the rainbow into immortality. The world saw a radiant teenager with endless promise. What they did not see was the relentless system that had already placed her on a treadmill of pills, schedules, and expectations no young girl could withstand. From her earliest days at MGM, Garland was treated less like a child and more like a commodity. Executives demanded she remain slim, energetic, and camera-ready. To enforce it, they prescribed pep pills to keep her awake during long shoots and sleeping tablets to force rest when exhaustion set in. What began as studio control became lifelong dependence. By the time her stardom was fully established, Garland's body and mind were already conditioned to function on chemistry rather than natural rhythms. Still, she delivered brilliance. Films like Meet Me in Street Louis and A Star is Born showcased her extraordinary talent, her voice, a mixture of innocence and heartbreak. On screen she glowed, off screen she wavered. The cycle of medications and late-night performances left her fragile, her moods swinging between joy and despair. Friends recalled her warmth but also her exhaustion moments when the burden of being Judy Garland seemed heavier than she could bear. Hollywood magnified the strain. Marriages faltered, financial troubles mounted, and public scrutiny grew merciless. Garland sought stability, but the system that had shaped her offered little room for rest. Concert tours kept her afloat, but behind the ovations her reliance on pills deepened. Each performance was a triumph shadowed by fear of collapse. By the late 1962nd, her voice still soared, but her health was deteriorating. On the 22nd of June 1969, in a modest London home, Garland's story came to an abrupt and tragic end at just 47. The official cause was an accidental barbiturate overdose, but for many, her death symbolized something larger, the final act of an industry that had taken a girl's innocence and demanded a woman's sacrifice. What makes Garland's story unforgettable is not simply its tragedy, but its humanity. She longed for love, stability, and peace desires as ordinary as those of her fans who adored her. Yet she was rarely allowed to be ordinary. The image of Dorothy, forever young and hopeful, lingered as Garland herself aged under impossible expectations. Today, Judy Garland's legacy is more than a cautionary tale. It is a reminder of both the beauty she gave and the price she paid. Her voice still echoes with yearning, her performances still captivate, but behind every note is the shadow of what she endured. She was not just a star of Hollywood's golden age, she was its brightest light and also its most devastating loss. And so our countdown ends not with scandal, but with sorrow. A story that reveals how even the greatest treasures of the screen were in the end heartbreakingly human. From W.C. Fields turning a prop into a prison to Judy Garland carrying the weight of an entire industry on her young shoulders, these stories remind us that Hollywood's golden age was never as golden as it seemed. Behind the shimmering marquees and timeless performances lay struggles that were often hidden, denied, or excused. Addiction was not just a private torment, it was woven into the very fabric of a system that demanded perfection and paid little attention to the cost. Looking back, it's impossible not to feel both admiration and sorrow. These stars gave us unforgettable films, voices, and characters, but they also left us with echoes of their pain. Their legacies are complicated, shaped by triumph and tragedy alike, and they force us to see them not as flawless icons, but as deeply human figures navigating impossible expectations. Which of these stories struck you the hardest? Let us know in the comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more journeys behind the glamour, consider subscribing. Hollywood's brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows, and there are many more truths still waiting to be told.